All right. So maybe before we get talking in about Immersion Fest too much,
Sure.
just tell me a little bit about your background in music when you got involved and kind of how it led to where, as you said, I used to play normal music, how it led into this.
Let me mute this so it's not making sounds, and then turn off notifications too. There we go. Okay, sure. I mean, I have been drawn to and involved in music almost as long as I can remember. One of my earliest memories is my mom singing Yellow Submarine to me in the bathtub. And then we listened to, my parents love music as well, so a lot of music growing up, a lot of classic rock. I started playing an instrument, I started playing guitar when I was 8 years old. And then, kind of semi-normal musical childhood. I had guitar lessons, and then I was in choir, and then in high school I did a cappella choir and various stage productions and musicals and all that. Then in college, music I played was more on the side as a hobby. I was in various bands from the time I was maybe 14 or 15. And in college, I stayed in some bands, but I started recording some of my friends as well. I had done simple recording for my high school bands, but in college it kind of got more complex. I got a bigger audio interface and I could do multi-track recordings. And so I was recording some bands I knew. And then I also started booking shows in college as well. And I started capturing and doing media for shows, capturing performances. So I got interested in live video and, like I said, booking shows and then recording. So all those things kind of happened while I was going to school here. I did an electrical engineering degree, which I don't currently work in, but it speaks to some of what I'm doing now. When I started electrical engineering, I would not have guessed that it would lead to this, but it did. It was a confluence of being a musician and then having a bunch of engineering knowledge jammed into my brain through the U of I engineering program, a rather intense U of I engineering program. So yeah, I kept music kind of as a hobby during those years. During all this time, I was doing mostly what one would consider traditional music. I was in blues bands, playing some jazz on the side, a lot of folk. I played a lot of acoustic guitar. I started playing punk rock. Those sorts of things, normal music. And so after college, I started working here for the university, and I was in that kind of after college, what do I do now phase? Like, okay, everything has been laid out to this point. You go to this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then college is over, and you're like, oh, now I just do life, I guess? Just wide and open-ended. So I was working a job. I was living down here. Both of my younger brothers were going to school here, so I decided to stick around. I would say partially because I wasn't really ready to jump right into a career. I felt a bit adrift. But I would say partially too. I liked the community here. I wanted to get more involved. And with both of my younger brothers here, I wanted to spend some time with them in our 20s. So I decided to stick around, and I was just working. And at that time, I think I decided, in lieu of anything else to do, I said, well, I can just keep recording more people. So in my basement, I started to expand the recording setup that I had. And myself and a friend started a project called Urbana-Basement, where we brought in local bands and we did studio sessions with them, where we would have multiple cameras, multi-track recording, and try and make a really polished product, but one that was like coming out of a basement. We were working kind of with that juxtaposition. We wanted, like, it looks like it looks like a basement. There's like pipes on the ceiling and everyone's real cramped and we're jammed in there, but we tried to make the end product really polished, like a real studio session. I think we did a pretty good job with that over the years. We ran that for maybe like 2 years, and gosh, I can't remember how many bands we did in that time. I gotta say, during those 2 years, it was at least once a month, sometimes more, we were doing bands. We probably had like 30 plus bands come through during that time. And during that time, I kept playing music. I'd started doing some concept projects. So that's kind of, I went from, I think that was maybe the first step toward the weird, was moving from just playing shows to like, wait, let's make these bands conceptual in nature in some way or another, and kind of build that concept on top of an existing genre. So we were doing that, and one of those happened to be an electropop band. It was called JORTS, which stood for, it was an acronym that stood for Joint Operations Research and Terraforming Specialists, and it was like a space opera, and we were aliens coming here to assimilate the Earth culture and terraform the planet. However, that really led me down the path of, or it sprung out of a path that I was following of explorations into analog synthesizers. Analog synthesizers came around in the 60s, really, earlier than that, but in like research laboratories. So it came into popular culture in like the late 60s. And then kind of died out in favor of digital synthesizers in the 80s, and then computers in the 90s. But there's been a resurgence of analog synthesizers. Analog synthesizers meaning there's no digital things going on, there's no computers inside. It's just electricity being bounced around by fun circuits until it makes nice sounds, or not nice sounds. And so in exploring those, I think I discovered a lot of the not nice sounds, and I was really intrigued by the inherent chaos that one can access through some of that, where it feels like a conversation between myself and the instrument. This is how I feel a lot with an acoustic guitar, say, that I've had for, since I was 12. There's an intimacy with that, where when I'm playing it, I don't feel like I'm just playing. I feel like there's a give and take, like the instrument resonates in a certain way, and that very much influences me. So there's kind of a feedback loop between us. And I feel the same way about analog electronics and analog synthesizers. And now there are also fairly well-designed digital synthesizers that take a lot of inspiration from the interface of old analog synthesizers. And some of those can also give that inspiration that makes you feel you have a connection, and you have a conversation between yourself and this instrument. So yeah, during that time, I was exploring analog synthesizers, and then somehow I got turned on to quadraphonic sound. I can't remember where that came from. I had always known that Pink Floyd was doing something with quadraphonic sound in the 70s, so speakers in front and behind you, early surround sound stuff. But I don't know what led me to this in maybe 2014. But as an offshoot of the electropop project, we started getting into more ambient sound design sorts of sets, noise sets. And as part of that, I discovered quadraphonic sound. So we did a few quadraphonic sets in town, and then I decided that the way I was doing it was really kludgy, and I didn't like that. So I kind of retreated and started figuring more things out, and that's when I built this thing. This is a Eurorack modular synthesizer. Basically, it's like Legos for sound. Which makes sense because I loved Legos as a kid. So it's just, my path is fairly linear. You can see it. This essentially allowed me to have greater control over quadraphonic sound. So after that, I did some more shows in town doing quad sound, and then I ended up at this festival in North Carolina called Moog Fest. It's named after the late Bob Moog, who was one of 2 or 3 people who really introduced analog synthesizers to pop music. Many people have heard of Moog. Many people say Moog. Doesn't really matter, but the man himself said his last name was pronounced Moog. So he may have just said that because it sounds cooler. Who knows? So at Moog Fest, I went to a workshop that was about spatial sound, and I said, oh, cool, I've been doing quadraphonic, and I show up there, and it's a room with 24 speakers all surrounding the audience, and my mind was blown apart. All of a sudden, quadraphonic felt wholly inadequate, and so I went and I chatted those people's ears off after their workshop, and they said, oh, we're from Virginia Tech. We have this facility there called The Cube. The Cube has 148 loudspeakers in it. And I was like, I have to see this place. So they told me that they were having a festival called Cube Fest 3 months later that was all about spatial sound and spatial music. So I attended that as well. And then from there, it was basically just all downhill or uphill, depending on which way you want to look at it. It was from there. I was just off and running. I decided that was what I really wanted to pursue. Yeah, and now here I sit with 16 speakers around me, and I still am wanting to grow this, and what I'm very interested in is developing tools to allow artists who don't want to get as deep in the tech as I am to be creatively expressive in these sorts of spaces. I really feel that this sort of thing is a very 21st century technology and a 21st century avenue to creative expression. And so to that end, a lot of the spatial sound I've encountered is cloistered off in the auspices of academia, it's hard to be, it's not very accessible to the general public. Now I will say CubeFest at Virginia Tech is open to anyone, and sometimes people from the town come, but I think there's still kind of that facility is part of the university, and some people maybe don't feel comfortable going to see shows there. Similarly here, we have the Krannert Center, which is wonderful, but I would say some people from the community don't feel like that's necessarily for them. I don't know. I don't know if that's the way it is or not, but I certainly see more university people at Krannert than community people. So I have a strong desire to take all of this and make it more accessible to the general public, whether that's community workshops or clubs or just art shows out in public spaces. That's what I'm really interested in now, and as well as designing systems that can be replicated by individuals that aren't necessarily as expensive as what I've seen in academia, and that's a concern to me too, because I'm currently self-funding all of this. So I'm very budget-minded, and this is the way when I've run art shows and things for a long time. You have to find the cheapest way to get a quality result, and so I think I'm pretty good at that now. And so with this project and a subsequent project, I'm trying to design something that I can put out and say, hey, does anyone else want to build one of these? Look, you don't need $30,000. Maybe you can do it for $5,000, $3,000. Can I get it down to $2,000? I don't know, maybe. But it's going to be somewhat expensive when you're talking massive amounts of speakers. But certainly if you can bring it down out of the realm of like, you need to be an institution to build this, to, hey, you could be, a group of individuals who each want to throw in, $500, $600, $700. You could maybe build a facility like this yourselves. So,
outside of you mentioned the Virginia Tech, are there other facilities out there that exist that are more community based and community oriented?
There are a few. So I've spent the past few years kind of traveling around the country and outside of the country a bit to find these sorts of venues. I'll say there has been a venue, an experience, I don't know, a place in San Francisco called Audium, and Audium has been there since the 60s. It was funded by, I can't remember the name. There was a big public group of funding that went out and allowed all sorts of artists to work. It may have been connected to like the CIA thing that was like funding Jackson Pollock and stuff. I don't remember, but I do know that public funds were used by an enterprising individual. Maybe not enterprising isn't the right term, but an inspired individual in San Francisco in the late 1960s to build this facility called Audium, and it's still running today. They've run weekly concerts almost continuously. There are some years that they've taken off, but almost continuously from the late 1960s to present day, Audium has run. But the thing about Audium is it's always like this program that is the Audium program. It's not like visiting artists or traveling through. It is like its own thing. So that's kind of the oldest version of this. I would say nowadays you're seeing more and more of this. There are some clubs around that are using Dolby Atmos. There's a club in Chicago called Soundbar. Now, I don't know how many groups are actually utilizing those capabilities, but it exists. And then there's a group called Envelop out of San Francisco as well, and they built a venue there called Envelop. And they also released a plugin for Ableton Live that's free. Ableton Live is not free, but the spatial sound plugin is free. So yeah, and they also have a system they've brought to some festivals, and now at Moogfest as well. The company Meyer Sound, big sound company, they have also been experimenting with doing spatial sound in a live festival concert venue. So you're seeing this happen more and more now, and the accessibility is growing. But that's only very recent that this is happening, that it's becoming more accessible.
Looking towards the Immersion Fest that's at the IMC, who is all involved in, on the back end of, okay, we're planning this, this festival, but then also when people go there, what can they expect to see? Who can they expect to see? And here, I guess I should better say.
Sure. We're still working on finalizing the lineup. We're just waiting for confirmations to come back from people. We've kind of reviewed our submissions at this point, and we'll see. So I can't speak to that just yet, but certainly check our website. I don't know when this is going to air, but we're hoping to start posting the lineup on Monday the 22nd.
Okay. All right.
And it'll be, I think, rolling out through that week and leading up to Immersion. But there will be many local artists here performing. We have some visual artists and video artists coming from out of town, and then there'll be pieces of fixed media. So these are just kind of sound files for playback that'll be happening in the Dome, and those are from people kind of all over the country and world. And I think that'll be quite an experience. Still sorting through submissions for that too. We got a lot. We were really actually kind of overwhelmed by the amount of national and international submissions we received, particularly people who wanted to come perform in the spatial sound system. Like I said, we were surprised. We didn't expect this, and so at this point we didn't have funding for it this time around, and it's coming up very soon. So this first iteration we're kind of treating as this is our inaugural fest, and it's been a struggle to reel it in and just say, okay, we don't need to go for all the big ideas in this one. Let's do something. Let's make it a good time, and let's lay the groundwork to potentially go out and find some more funding for another iteration where we could really start to bring some national and international people working in spatial sound to our community of Champaign-Urbana here. But yeah, we've, as far as people who have been working on this, it's been myself, John McNally, who has a farm in town and performs as Two-Legged Zoo, Veronica Mullen, who ran a venue in town called Blips and Chits for a while, and has played in various local bands as well, and Jared Miller, who is involved in lots of things in this community. He got on board to help us kind of work with the administrative aspect now that we're nearing the festival date. And he performs as Strictly DJ, so he'll be performing some as well. I should say that, yeah, my organizer John McNally he will be performing in the Dome. So what can you expect to see at Immersion? It's a multifaceted, multidisciplinary experimental arts festival. So what we're really trying to do is completely transform the IMC. We want people to walk in and be in a different world. There will be visual arts galleries with painting and potentially some sculpture. There will be some interactive sculptures and installations happening. There will be a video art gallery with video art from a national and international submission process. There will be a main stage with kind of more traditional insofar as it's on a stage performances. They will be experimental, and they're going to run the gamut of genre. There will be some spoken word, and then I think there will be 4 live performances in the Dome, as well as several programs of fixed media. The fixed media programs, I don't know how many there will be yet, but let's say there are 4 20-minute blocks of content. Those will be repeated several times throughout the weekend because only so many people will be able to fit inside the spatial sound system at once, and that will give a chance for more people to experience this. We'll also have some workshops on Saturday during the day. I believe we will have an audio and video synthesizer, or both audio synthesizer building workshop and video synthesizer building workshop, as well as a few workshops talking about the tools I used to build the spatial sound system, some free plugins that you can use, particularly if you are an Ableton user, to get started with spatial sound. And some different techniques that our video artists use to create their works as well. I think there's a little bit of everything. We're just trying to expose some people to art that's being created maybe on the fringes of what you would consider genres, things that are pushing the boundaries a bit. There will be things that are abrasive. There will be things that are very meditative. We'll have some actually meditation times in the Dome. I really hope to widen people's perspective on the types of art being created, both in this community and outside of it, and hopefully act as a catalyst that can inspire people to look into some art forms that they may not have before. They may not have even been aware of. They may have been aware of it, but thought, well, they don't really know how to do that. Hopefully this will catalyze people to say, there are no rules. Just go in there and have fun, and here are some jumping off points. And here then are some expressions of what you can do with this, with just a little bit of effort and inspiration.
What does it mean to be in a community like Urbana-Champaign, that you're able to do something like this? I feel like I've been in a number of other, even central Illinois towns where it's like, this one, you know what I mean? You just don't have the audience, let alone not everyone understands,
Sure.
Oh, this is a different form of art, or this is that. What does it mean, to be in Urbana-Champaign, a college town, to where, people are kind of more open to this, more accepting.
Sure.
And, even like the city's willing to fund this, and,
Right.
Within an arts grant.
We will see if we have an audience for this. It's something we're going to find out. I'd say it's really wonderful. I've put on art shows before, and particularly this show, Immersion, grew out of a series of shows myself and John and some others, Austin Duncan, did called Expressions. Those were much more seat of the pants, but they had a similar vibe, a similar kind of multifaceted nature. So the idea definitely grew out of that, but the only reason we were able to do it this big and say, we're going to build this spatial sound system, we're going to put out calls for submissions, we're going to expand this to not just be music, but also include visual arts and maybe a video art gallery and some workshops. The only reason we were able to do that was the knowledge that Urbana has a healthy arts grant program that we were able to apply for and then subsequently receive. That was huge. The show was going to go on whether or not we received that, just because the deadline fell so close to our festival date. But things would have been scaled back significantly. We would not have been able to have as many artists play, and we would not have been able to go as big as we are for this first iteration. So we're very grateful for that. That said, we can always use more funding. That's what I'm learning planning a festival. It's like, always use more funding. The way costs add up is like, whoa, okay. But yeah, I would say being in a community like Champaign-Urbana, it is small, so I think that's useful insofar as we can put the word out and it might reach a larger portion of people. The community tends to be a little more tight-knit, so there's more word of mouth, I think, that happens. I would also say that with the university here and with the turnover of people, as well as the diversity of people that live and work here, people are used to being exposed to many different cultures and many different styles of artistic expression. Certainly with the fact that we have a fairly large performing arts school here, as well as an art museum and things like a global arts initiative through the university. I think there's a fair tradition of folks here doing more experimental art, which is cool. Coming out of specifically coming out of the dance program at UIUC, and like I said, what Jason Finkelman is doing with the Global Arts Initiative and what he's been doing for years with Sudden Sound. That's a huge inspiration for me in throwing these sorts of shows. And I'm very happy to say, I can say and can confirm that Jason Finkelman will be performing and bringing a group to perform at Immersion, which I'm like very excited about because, as I said, he was a big inspiration in the show series he's done over the years. Have inspired me and I think others. So I'm happy to be kind of not picking up the torch because he has not at all put it down, but maybe lighting another torch. So yeah, I think there's a very open-minded population here, which is great. You know, I'm looking forward to see how many people will come out to this.
Yeah, very cool. All right, I think that's plenty. I think that's very good.
A lot.